In this segment, I'm going to review the options under the Stitches drop-down menu. And to help prepare for that segment, I've just simply opened up a JEF embroidery design that I'd previously created. And the reason why I wanted to have a JEF file is because a lot of the options under the Stitches drop-down menu relate to making changes to existing embroidery designs. So let's go to the Stitches drop-down menu and just review our options here. So we've got Remove Small Stitches, we've got Divide, we've got Auto-Density, we've got Convert Step to Satin, we've got an Edit Step Pattern option, and we have Replace and Move Outline. Now these last two I might leave until I start showing on the left-hand menu how to actually select stitches and then modify them. But the rest of these will be fine for what we've learned so far. And so what I'll do to get started is I'm just going to choose the Remove Small Stitches option. And what happens is you get a window that comes up and it gives you a stitch range. So small stitches from 0.0 millimeters. In other words, there's no movement at all between two needle penetrations. And you can set the longer distance. So here I've got it set at 0.04. So that means any stitches that are 0.04 of a millimeter or smaller would be removed from this design. Now, before I run this, I'm just going to point out this design has 28,570 stitches. So if I say OK, it goes ahead and processes it, and now, just taking a look at the bottom, I can see that this design has 27,726 stitches. So that's really a significant change, although this is a large design. It took out, quite a few stitches, I forget, almost 800 stitches or something like that that was removed from the design. Now, another option under the Stitches drop-down menu is called Divide, and perhaps I'll just explain what that means. So, for example, if I select this area of the design right here, and I'm going to zoom in on it, now notice how this satin column goes from kind of skinnier to gets wider and then wider until it gets to its widest point and it starts to get skinnier again. Well, perhaps you've got a design and you feel that the satin stitches are too long and you'd like to have them divided. And what it'll do is, so I have selected an area, and before I use the tool, I think I'll also do one thing to help show this. Here on the standard toolbar, I have the ability to show the stitch marks. When I turn that on, you can see here how every single stitch of the design gets shown with a little circle. So those are the needle penetrations. So the idea is, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. Here, as this design gets wider, I want it to divide. And so let's just confirm, yes, I have this area selected, and I'm going to choose Stitches and Divide. And it asks me, from what length do I want to divide? So we'll set it, it's set right now at 3 millimeters. So that means anything that's longer than 3 millimeters will get divided into 2 equal pieces, because equal pieces is checked off. So if I say OK, and then I'll take a closer look here. If I just zoom in closely, you can see here, see, I'll use undo. That's how it was originally. And then with redo, you can see here that it added needle penetrations into this area here. So these stitches must be longer than that 3 millimeters. Not here though, they didn't add any there, but it split a few there. And it didn't split any until I got back down to this area, and it split some here, and you can see that there's some that were split over here as well. So the idea is when you use divide, there's another area down here that has some dividing on it. The software is going to take a longer satin stitch and divide it in half. Alright, now I'm going to choose undo to put the design back to the way it was. And the next option under Stitches drop-down menu is Auto-Density. And the purpose of this, now let's just imagine that we selected a part of this design. So I'm going to select a portion of this scroll and move it over. And you can see it's not all the scroll. Was divided into a couple pieces, but that doesn't matter. I want to make this area smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and decrease the size. Now, even though I decreased the size, all of the original stitches are still there. We haven't asked it to change the density. So that's where this tool comes in, because you can see I reduced the size of this for, until maybe it's even half of its original size. So if I choose Stitches and Auto-Density, Apply, and I take a closer look, you can see here that it reduced the stitches to maintain the original density of them. So if I just choose Undo, you can see how many more stitches there were. That was the density that was for the original size. And so when I use Wings Modular to make size changes to stitch designs that I didn't create, that I just have a stitch file for, when I change the size, it does not change the number of stitches, and it requires us to actually apply that. So it's called Auto-Density Apply, and it'll automatically adjust the density of those stitches. So that's the Auto-Density option, and again I'm just going to choose Undo and Undo a couple times until I put that back to where it belongs, and my design is unchanged. So the next option under the Stitches drop-down menu is called Convert Step to Satin. And I don't often use the term step as much as I might call it a weave fill. The idea of a step fill is the opposite of a satin fill. In other words, any area that's been filled in with needle penetrations, and you can call it a step stitch, you can call it a tatami stitch, you can call it weave fill. What I'm going to do is just select a portion of this design. What did I get? So here's the light blue fill from underneath this butterfly wing. We're going to zoom in, and here you can see clearly the area is filled in with a weave fill or a step fill. Now, the ability to adjust that, so Stitches and Convert Step to Satin. It takes all those needle penetrations out and just leaves the needle penetrations on the outer edges, and what you can see that's remaining in here is actually just the underlay that it was untouched. I'm going to choose Undo and Undo. Maybe that's not an appropriate example of using it, but for example, here's an area of the design, this bright pink area here has a small area, not too large, and it's been filled in with what looks like it was probably some sort of a split satin stitch. Now, if I use Stitches and Convert Step to Satin, you'll see that it just nicely cleans that up and makes it a satin stitch. So you can see where maybe you've taken a design and reduced its size, and now there's areas that were fill or were step, and you'd like to convert them to satin. So that's your option. And I'm going to go ahead and I guess do Undo to remove that and put it back. Now the next option under the Stitches drop-down menu is called Edit the Step Pattern, and this is really quite interesting. I think maybe what I'll do is I will grab that light blue fill again and move it over here and zoom in so you can see the stitches and how they look. Now if I choose Stitches and Edit Step Pattern, what you can see here is the step pattern designer, and this is your ability to decide how many rows of step do you want in your step pattern. So if you want, I think a nice sort of default one might have 3 rows, 0, 33, 66, but you can play with it. You could have 4 rows, you could make them sort of like equal widths. So what this is about, when it sews a piece of weave fill or a tatami or a step fill, the first row, the needle penetrations are set at a stitch length. So let's say it's a 4mm stitch length, so it's 4. And it moves along the same line to the next one, 4, and then along the next one for 4. And when it makes the next row, it'll offset those stitches by a percentage. So if it's a 4mm stitch length and you have 4 rows that are 25, 50, 75, and 100, let's say, then you're going to get each row will offset by 1mm. So the idea is you can have 5 rows and you can adjust them, and notice here in this little preview box I can see what that will look like. So if you wanted to, you could have any number of rows of offsets. And so what you can see here is I create the look of the pattern. And when I say OK, it actually edits that pattern in my weave fill. So you have the ability to edit your step pattern. And like I said, you can have as many rows as you want and as many offsets as you want. And when you say OK, it will modify your step pattern. So you can create any kind of piece of fill that you want. And I thought that was a really interesting tool to have, the edit step pattern. It gives you a very visual look to how your stitches are going to be placed. And if you decide you just want to go back to having 3 rows and you want them to be kind of at that default, let's see, usually you go 30, and then you can have the next one at 60 and the next one at 90 or whatever. 3 equal rows like this gives a nice sort of smooth pattern to it, and that's what you'll get. So that's the segment about using the stitches drop down menu, and I will leave these two to come back to.